welcome you all.
Sorry, hold on, Grover, we need to start the record. Oh, there we go. I just made Amanda co-host. I was derelict in my duties. I apologize.
That's
But
okay.
we're being recorded now.
Very good. That's my next line. And this meeting is convening remotely by Zoom. And please note this meeting is being recorded. I do have a question. Do we have people in the audience? Because we can't see that.
Yes, and oh, it looks like we need to promote a couple of people.
Okay.
So Desi and Ben are coming in.
Okay. Now we have a super majority. Hey, hey.
There you go. Yes, there are 6 attendees. Looks like some of them are staff. Jan Carruthers is on, Thelma Hagen Miller, Adam Moore, and the rest it looks like our NCPRD staff.
Excellent. Well, welcome all. Sorry you guys got trapped out in the gallery, but nonetheless, we are being recorded and moving on. So our first agenda item, we have now called to order and we're running ahead of schedule. So our action item is to approve the DAC meeting summary from June 11th. Are there any objections to or corrections that need to be made? Anita, your hand's up.
Yeah, I just wanted to add one more thing to my the section on my member report. Not to change anything, but to say that also what I had brought up last time was that I wanted people who had specialized expertise to share it with us at DAC meetings. And that in my mind would be Ben Johnson talking about everything to do with playgrounds, if he's into it.
Yeah.
Or Tanya Williamson telling us about not only wetlands in general, but the wetlands in NCPRD's portfolio. And of course, I didn't say it last time, but I would also like to hear a lot about community centers from Joel. So
Cool.
I emailed Jessica, but she's on vacation, but I emailed the wording to her so she could add it in whenever, or somebody can.
Okay, good.
We'll get that updated.
Thank you.
So are there any further additions or corrections? Okay, if no, I don't see any hands or anything like that. Good. So the meeting the summary stands approved. So first agenda item after that is Metro local share.
And Chair, Heather is not on right now. She sent me a text saying she's trying to get on and should be here momentarily. If oh, there she is. Boom. All right. There we go.
That's called just in time.
We're right to you for the Metro local share.
Did Heather hear you?
I don't know. Heather, can you hear us? Okay, we can't hear you. Your showing is muted and we're to you. So
okay, there we go.
There we go.
Yeah, having some sound issues unless I have my headphones, so my apologies. Okay, you guys ready for a little, we're up local share first, correct?
Yes.
Yeah.
Okay. Just getting ready to share my screen. You guys see the screen yet?
No.
Not yet.
Oh, hold on. Okay, how about now? Okay, great. All right, let me get you the best view of this. Okay. So good evening, everybody. I wanted to give you a little bit of a local share update tonight, just on process ahead. I know some of you have had a chance to look ahead at the packet tonight. Whoops. But I'm just going to go over the Metro Bond local share as the overview of what this program is. I'll talk a little bit about the criteria. There's a lot of information in those slides. I won't be reading it all, but I want to kind of give you an idea of the criteria that we have for this program. Talk a little bit about NCPRD priorities and the process, and just go over a timeline. And we'll have some time for questions as well. So the Metro Parks and Nature Bond, as many of you know, was put out to the voters in November of 2019, and it was passed with the major objectives to connect with nature close to home, to protect clean water, and to restore fish and wildlife habitat. It also had as overarching priorities, very distinctly different from the last bond measure, goals toward racial equity and toward achieving more resilience to climate change. So there were a lot of differences from the last Metro bond, but those were some of the key ones since the earlier 2006. There are 6 programs included in the bond, and one of the ones you've heard us talk about is local share. That's our focus tonight, but there's actually 6 different bond measure areas, and local share is just one, but it's a big one. It's 92 million across the metro region, and it's broken up to individual agencies. It isn't assigned to projects, it's assigned to agencies, and they leave us the work to develop a plan for what to do with that funding based on their criteria and our priorities. So our NCPRD share, if you can see my cursor, it's over to the right in green, is 4.508 million and some change. So we're looking to move forward on a process to utilize those funds. There's some basic types of eligibility for the local share. One is to maintain or develop public access facilities at public parks and natural areas. So you can think about that as a park development, pretty typical. Also design and construct local or regional trails. So we're talking linear trails. Also acquiring natural areas or parkland. And there's also some related to environmental education and restoring fish and wildlife habitat. Not unapplicable to NCPRD, but I would say these ones on the top are a little bit more in line with kind of our day-to-day work, but we do some things in line with these types of projects as well. So the bond and local share criteria is really a lot of different layers of guidance and criteria. So one, and I'll tick through these again, I won't read every bit on every page because we'd be here forever, but we have guidance including the bond measure principles. Those are overarching all the programs, including the local share. We've got criteria for community engagement and racial equity, criteria for climate resilience, and criteria for local share. So what we're doing with our process is we are looking at taking our priorities from our existing plans and filtering those through the local share criteria. And that gives us an idea of some projects that are more readily eligible. And our process would be to do that professional staff work up front and provide some, talking material for eligible projects. And I'll talk a little bit about that again at the end. So our recent process, what I would consider kind of 2021 and onward, was to begin talking with Metro, because they were talking with local jurisdictions about their goals, finalizing the guidance, and asking us for ideas of projects without any level of commitment yet. So we went through an internal process to just look at some of the near-term projects that had been on our CIP list and in our budgets at different times, which included Milwaukee Bay Park, Concord Property Park, and Jennings Lodge Elementary Park. And we looked at those initially as, okay, what if we took a regional project, a community project, and a neighborhood project? This was pretty early on, before the guidance was even complete or Metro staff had started conversations with local agencies. We then conducted a Metro Bond staff site visit at Milwaukee Bay Park and Concord as 2 of our biggest capital projects. And Milwaukee Bay Park was assessed as a fit for bond funding, and Concord was seen as not all too congruent with the park and nature bond goals, a great project in their eyes, but not necessarily for park and nature funding. So we took a little bit of step back and said, we're going to have to determine other projects to identify them for prioritization. In the meantime, we were able to do some homework on revising our contracts for construction projects to promote workforce diversity and equity in contracting. And these are just sort of the nuts and bolts operationally of some of the things that we need to do to better meet the bond criteria. So when we hire a contractor, we can kind of hold them to the standards that we need to meet for the local share money for a project such as Concord, for a project such as Milwaukee Bay. So we're equipped ahead of time, because a lot of jurisdictions don't have projects that just started when the bond passed. A lot of jurisdictions like us have projects that they've been planning for a while and hope to be able to work those into alignment with local share criteria. So again, these are the slides. If you took a look ahead at the packet, I'm not going to read through all of these, but there's a lot of guiding principles for the bonds. This sort of sets the tone for the bond. Things like serving the community through inclusive engagement, transparency, and accountability. Things like advancing racial equity through bond investments, protecting clean water for people, fish, and wildlife, etc. So you can see Metro was very aspirational in setting some setting kind of a high bar for how we fund projects in the region in line with the goals. And once that measure passes, with the voters, this is what we need to abide by. They also set criteria specifically on community engagement and racial equity. So this was so central to the bond measure and so integral to the bond language that they said, you need to meet these criteria. So we need to meaningfully engage with communities of color, indigenous communities, people with low incomes, and other historically marginalized communities in planning, development, and selection of projects. So that's always been part of our intended process, and et cetera. We have a lot of things we need to do to meet their goals. And I will say, no project is perfect. Metro's been very clear that agencies are all in different places and they'll meet us where we are to the maximum extent possible. But they are trying to push local agencies to kind of rise up to this bar of greater engagement and greater focus on racial equity to move the region toward that overall. There's also program criteria on climate resilience. And this is a category where you don't have to meet all 5, but in some cases, projects will meet more than one of these. If you picked a bunch of our projects out of a hat, some would meet these well, some would meet these thoroughly, some wouldn't meet them very well, and some might not meet them at all. But generally speaking, we want to be meeting these climate resilience criteria as much as possible. And then finally, local share criteria. So they made this pretty broad and said, look, local share criteria, we can be doing a lot of different things with these projects as long as you meet the other requirements. So they're trying to give us some latitude to pick projects that fit our local agency priorities, but also fit the bond. So with that said, you can imagine we've got kind of a sorting process here that we need to work through both internally as a professional staff, as subject matter experts, but also in tandem with Metro and also in tandem with the community. So in June, that's just putting a stake at where we are now, providing this overview and next steps, and then reviewing the CIP list, which we had a draft CIP list in 2018, and then we brought that to you in 2021, late in the year to use for the SDC list. These are all inputs from which we can gather information. They're not the end all be all, but there's important resources to identify how priorities have been gathered over time. So we want to look at that, look through the criteria, like that previous slide showed, running it through and kind of seeing what projects are bubbling up, what projects look like they're going to be a great fit. Oh, look, that's a priority for NCPRD and it's a priority for Metro, and that's where we want to do the alignment. Metro does review that alignment early on. They want to see some preliminary project lists before we go too broadly in the community, because they're really trying to ensure voters that they're following the bond and having agencies meet these criteria, not just kind of giving it a head nod. So that's why you see that piece up front. It doesn't mean that we're picking the projects and finalizing them before we bring them to the community. So we would be able to bring that to the DAC and the broader community and review the eligible projects list. And at that point, it could be also, and I've talked about this with fellow staff, it could be that we have something that's not on the list and it's not on our CIP and it hasn't been identified as a priority, but it doesn't mean it's not necessarily something that could become eligible. Would it be the top one? Who knows? But I think that that's sort of the process where we want to give you a strong, robust, defensible list that we know has met criteria, but we also want to leave room for input. At that point, we would take back feedback that we get from the DAC and the community and be bringing back a list for the DIC to excuse me, to recommend a final list. At that point, it can go back to the board, and we would submit it to Metro. So that would be both our board before going to Metro, and then Metro reviews it, and it goes back to both parties to approve. So it's a real stepwise process. There's different things we have to do at different checkpoints. This process is really Metro's process. They're the ones that pass the bond, and they're the ones that have the money. But that being said, they're very committed to assisting local agencies and navigating our way through project lists. And they've been giving us some technical assistance on some better ways to engage community members, especially historically marginalized groups that many agencies in the region have, I would say, not done extremely effectively over time. So they're providing a lot of resources, and ultimately it's up to us to kind of follow these steps. And again, importantly, not just meet bond criteria, but make sure we're meeting NCPRD priorities as well. So I think with that, I will stop and just see if there are any questions.
Yes, Anita.
Well, I think, Heather, you've been speaking a little bit to what my concerns were that I wrote about yesterday to everybody about how soon the community gets engaged or whether things get locked in place before the community gets to speak. I think you've been talking about that a little. And I guess you all know that my concern is that I want the community to get involved as soon as possible, not just on local share, but on the CIP, not just vetting, but ideas and requests and aspirations. So I just wanted to speak to that.
Yeah, thank you, Anita. And that's a really good point. And I think in an ideal universe, we would have, the local share would be passed and the guidance would be out, and we would have just come out with our system plan and have a new CIP, and we just plug it right in. That is, if that was the case, I'd be out having ice cream and bonbons somewhere right now because I wouldn't be needed. But I think that's kind of a little bit of the challenge that we have, not insurmountable at all, but it just makes it a little bit harder for us right now as a population and as a team, as staff, to say, okay, it may not be, our planning documents, it may not be perfect, but to your point, Anita, we've done a lot of community work over the years. We want to draw on that. We want to draw on things that have been created before, but then we do want to bring it to the community and get more input. And in addition, if we've done engagement on individual projects, for example, we did a lot of individual engagement on Concord, and we did a lot of individual engagement on the Milwaukee Bay Park. We want to be able to also feed that in. That really, in Metro's eyes, that really counts for part of our engagement effort.
Are you done, Anita?
Well, I was just going to say, I remember particularly the Concord open house that happened, and I guess also some surveys, and that seemed like a great way to go. So that's sort of what you're picturing for maybe different areas in the district or different projects, or just a more general kind of like events or something. I'm just wondering how the community engagement is manifested, how it is.
Yeah, it's a great question. It isn't completely scripted out yet, but essentially we want to do a couple of different things when we do community engagement. We want to be able to go to different areas because they have different character. They have different neighborhoods. But we also want to be able to go to different groups. So for example, with the Milwaukee Bay Park project at a recent milestone, we partnered with the North Clackamas School District and specifically worked with some of their parent groups for different age school kids that are Spanish speaking residents. And so, trying to reach specific populations that we know have not been historically engaged for a variety of reasons. And it's probably not for lack of interest. It's just engagement across the board is always challenging, and sometimes to reach the people who, I'm preaching to the choir, but sometimes to reach the people who are the most difficult to reach takes the most amount of work. So I think there's always going to be a place for those large workshops. We tend to see that we have a certain kind of general demographic that comes to a lot of those types of events. We know we want to have other types of events in small groups that will also speak to other members of the community. So I think it's a real mix, and we'll be Part of the reason we don't want to rush it and we're not there yet is because we want to roll that out in a way that is solid, but also we're not trying to recreate a whole system planning effort. That's its own big initiative, but we need to kind of get going on this and not wait, for that whole process to take place. Does that answer your question? Okay.
Yeah, it's great.
Mr. Savas.
Yeah, Heather, thanks for your presentation. I put something in the chat about the census tracts. We've, over the last 7 years or so, we've experienced quite the transformation as it comes to income levels as a result of displacement and gentrification to some degree. So have we mapped the district to know where those census tracts are probably the most pronounced? I have done some research on that where children or even youth as young as 23 or 24 years old, there's, the way census tracts are drawn, they're drawn with age groups, but you'll see at least if it's still like I last saw, that there are areas within the district that certain age groups are 100% in poverty, not 85, not 50%, but 100% of age groups are in poverty. So I think it'd be a valuable thing to address some of these opportunities when it comes to the low income criteria and marginalized communities that you pointed out or that are in your PowerPoint.
Yeah, and we can look at those. That's relatively easy. The only hiccup being the most recent census data is still not available. So we have to look at things like American Community Survey that are proxies until we get the new survey data. But we'll be looking at the most relevant and most recent data that we can. And there's a lot of criteria. There's income, there's race and ethnicity. There's a lot of different factors that I think are important to look at. And I should say too, we want to do a really good job on this. We also know we're going to be doing a much more comprehensive look at exactly this in the master planning system planning process. So I think we do have to be mindful of just using our resources wisely to do this as best we can, and also dive in even deeper for the system plan effort, if that makes sense. So I appreciate you raising that, Commissioner's office.
Yeah, just one thing I want to add is that when you look at it, you'll never really find anything that's extremely up to date. I've been following census tracts for about 20 years. So you always see they're 2-3 years, but they really don't move. And the trend is real. So if you're looking at a trend where a certain area is declining in income levels, for example, that trend usually stays there. So it doesn't change dramatically within. So all the information out there, even if it's two years old, is still valuable. And I think it would inform not only the district advisory committee, but maybe some of our decisions and opportunities. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you.
Great. Did you have your hand up, Deborah? Okay, good. So I'm going to speak as a representative from sub-area 1. And I appreciate the presentation, and I enjoyed reading the material, and I looked at it in a lot of detail, and it raises a lot of questions about, okay, is there a timeline by which this money has to be spent? Our $4.3 million or whatever the exact number was, but so I have a series of questions, but that's the first one. That is our timeline when that has to be spent by?
I don't know if there's an end year, but there's no immediate timeline. And actually the money is not in our hands, just to be clear. It's a reimbursement based program. Once we have priorities, they can give us a small percentage up front for a ready project, but basically they hold that money until we're ready. Our bigger thing that I would say, because I followed this process really closely throughout the last couple of years through Metro, is their council has been really eager to get money into communities as quickly as possible, to make sure that, especially post-COVID and wildfire, just really wanting to get money into the local communities, to local contractors, to local projects. So there is an effort to not sit on it forever, but there's not necessarily a ticking clock at the moment.
Good to know. Okay, and other quick question is there a match requirement for any of this money?
No, we just have to meet those criteria,
Okay,
and we
good.
have to tell them how we spent the money before we get reimbursed.
Okay, good. So you speak of a community engagement process, and unfortunately, that's still a mystery to me on how we're going to do that. I appreciate a couple of references of things that have already been done, et cetera. And yet, when I go back to, as an example, the document that y'all published in January of 2021 in your policy session meeting with the Board of County Commissioners, it specifically says that discuss project and funding for the DAC once it meets, work with the DAC on a community engagement process. So that means work with to find one and to discuss and establish priorities for the local share allocation. So holding that thought and then looking at what our performance clackamas requires, one of our first steps is that we need to identify what the residents, that's all 105,000+ people, not every one of them, but some across that area. And I look at places that lack parks significantly, sub-area 4 being one of those areas that lacks parks significantly. Sub-area 1 is another area that lacks parks. And this has been true since the 80s when it was written into the comprehensive plan, and it still is true to this day. So I want to look at, actually bouncing a bit off of what Commissioner Savas had to say, low income. If you look at the income tracts, there are some very wealthy income tracts in sub-area 1 and 2, but then there are some just completely poverty, high crime, etc. And the whole thing that it speaks about is having nature available. And when I read the idea of the things that they list in the principles for criteria for the local share, the 10 items. So we're talking about making parks welcoming. Now, isn't there a park in sub area 2 that's called East Park or whatever, that is just a piece of dirt with some grass on it? Is that not true? Okay, so that's been that way for the 30+ years I've lived here. And when it speaks specifically to invest in new and existing park amenities, and it also talks about maintaining and updating the park equipment that we have, I think we got a whole lot of stuff, and we need to figure out where the priority areas are. And that, when I looked at your timeline, I appreciate it, but I don't see how we're going to be able to get the word out to the affected people specifically. And I appreciate that there are Spanish speakers who are in the NCPRD parents group. That's great. I spent 15 years working with primarily Spanish speakers, and to get the parents to participate, good for you, because most of them have a busy life. And so I'm glad they do, and they do care about their kids greatly. So I'm just concerned about, when will we hear more about the specifics of the criteria for community engagement and where that ties into the low income, and how does that tie into how the sub areas have a say in it? Because if we just look at distribution of parks across the sub areas, it's not balanced. So that's mine, and I don't know how you're going to address all that, but those are my concerns, because there's been no specifics about those processes. So Anita, your hand was up before Mike's, but Mike, if you want to go first, please do.
Well, there's a lot to unpack there, Chair.
Betcha.
Because the main point of this is we can't just create projects out of nothing for this metro local share. There's confusion on the CIP process, which is down the road, and we know that, where we're going to be looking throughout the district and identifying where service needs are based on all these factors that we're talking about, and develop a community inputted process on how we build the CIP list. Mm-hmm. The metro local share is a different beast. We can't just have people coming and saying, well, we want this park or we want this project. If we don't have it on, as Heather was saying, kind of a list that we're working from. You all have a capital improvement plan list. The last one goes back to 2007. If we need to work off of that list, that's fine. But that's the adopted list of park projects. We need to go through the prioritization and redoing of all of that, and everybody's recognized that. But the metro local share, the entire part of this presentation was, we have criteria, and when we look at the projects that we have on our current CIP list, and that's what we're going to show you in next month's meeting, is whatever list you want us to work off of, whether it's a project that's on a list or not, we can put the check marks next to those criteria of what's met and what's not. And as we go through, especially when we're having to meet, all 11 of something or multiple things, it's going to come out to be a very small list of what's available for us to do right now. Now, as you and I talked, there's also the possibility that the decision is we don't do anything with the money and we hold on to it for land acquisition if a property becomes available. There's some trail projects that Heather and I were going to talk with you about next month that could be considered to be eligible and added in. They're not in our CIP list. But to go and have a full community public thing to say, how should we spend the metro local share? We have to meet those criteria first. And so it would be a large amount of time spent on really what we're talking about is building a CIP list, which is different than how we spend the $4.5 million within the eligibility criteria set forth and move that part forward in whatever way, whatever the projects are. We can't just say start fresh and act like we've not got a CIP list to work from. So I don't know. I don't know an easier way to say that, but that's, we don't want to confuse the CIP with the metro local share building of eligible projects.
Okay, Anita.
Yeah, it's a more specific question just about Concord and the local share. I'm just kind of curious about why it wasn't eligible. I mean, I'm sure there's a good reason, but I'm just curious about what it is.
They did not think it met the criteria. Just period.
Well,
I mean,
they just said it, and that's how they didn't say specifically what was missing or what was wrong.
they're not. They
suitable.
said if it was a park designed with specifically with kind of a natural area enhancement, that they would consider that a more eligible project. And so we even talked about like, well, what about planting trees on the perimeter? And I would still make a try for at least funding a portion of it for that reason. But as a wholesale, park project, they were not interested. They just said, based on all the projects we're seeing, this wouldn't qualify.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Okay, so I put my head back up because I wanted to comment some more. Thank you for that, Heather. And it actually was one of my questions. There is no plan currently for what the park at Concord is. That's one of my major 4 years of working on the Concord task force. My biggest, not biggest, but one of my ongoing frustrations is there is no plan. So I don't know what got discussed with them, but there is no plan. There has been no plan that talks about nature, tree planting, and the other thing we need to talk about water. Have any of you been up there when it's raining? This is a hill that's been cut into and water seeps all the time. So there has to be a responsible method of dealing with water drainage. And having gone through the Jennings Lodge campgrounds process, and the whole reason it went through the Army Corps of Engineers was water runoff for the 150-year floods, but particularly 100-year, and it was ill prepared. So they had to cut a special thing, get permission to make a overflow into the Willamette River, and et cetera, et cetera. But the point is, that's a lot of water, and the hill is even bigger and has more behind it at Concord. And so there is all of that. And so how does that water get mitigated in a responsible way that takes advantage of what it says about water cleanliness and purification, et cetera, in line with being a park? And there is no plan. So I would like to keep open that that's a reality. And then I appreciated what Mike said, but I want to say, if there is not a time limit, then we're not in a quick pressure to pick those priorities, because we do not yet have the aforementioned community engagement process to establish priorities for the local share. And that's been on the docket since January of last year, and the hope that it would have been done by a year ago right now. So we still have to get that done. That was what we said we're going to do. And I just don't want to have this be a rush job, because there is no time limit. So it's not like we're just going to sit on it and pretend. And I really appreciated Mike bringing up the fact that, and it'll come up later when we get into the reports, but the issue around acquisition, I want to know more about what our plan is about acquisition of property, because I've watched piece of property after piece of property that have been recommended to NCPRD, never to anyone's knowledge investigated, and then bought up by developers. And riverfront property for a bargain. But nonetheless, I want to know what our processes are for this, so that we're not in a rush to quick, we got to spend the money, it's burning a hole in our pocket, because it's not. Yes, Desi.
Yeah, I just want to agree with Joel in the chat. I think we're getting a little off track.
I don't know about the chat, so I can't speak to that.
That's okay. I just would like us to try and stay on track with what we are here to do. And, you know, sometimes these meetings end up going a little too far into the weeds when we need to stay the course. So I just wanted to bring that up. And thank you, Joel, for bringing it up too.
Yeah, thank you both. Yes, Ryan.
Yeah, lot of things. We don't have a up-to-date system plan
Correct.
that will solve a lot of the questions that we have, and that's a process that we need to focus on moving towards, so that we can start to identify how we acquire properties, where we acquire properties, what the policies are for that. So I think there's some really great questions there. And a lot of the questions will be answered by going through a comprehensive system planning process. And, you know, we need to really support getting that moving forward. And then, yeah, so keep moving forward on that.
I thank you for that, Ryan, and I agree. And thank you for bringing up the system plan and that timeline, because in truth, that is a big boogaboo that we need to deal with. My question though is, when I saw that timeline, I have too many papers in front of me, but when I saw that timeline that Heather has in her presentation, it's as though this is all going to come to a head and we're going to have a decision by when was that date you had in here? Timeline. Apologize wherever you had your timeline, but it's pretty darn quick. And I don't know, and that's my biggest concern, is when you put a timeline that says we're going to make a recommendation in 4 months, and there's no process, and we're all in agreement that there's a whole lot of ground that hasn't been covered. I question why we would ever predict that we would come up with a recommendation by the end of October, given all this discussion. So I'd like that addressed before we're done. Yes, Dave, you're up.
Oh, okay, I'd like to go something a little more basic. My understanding is that this is all for capital projects and not for operating costs.
Correct.
For just standard maintenance and things like that. So the question is this new money that we're getting? It's not money that we've already allocated to some other project, or some other project needs to get completed. So in other words, this is really new money that we can plan through whatever projects we want.
It's money that we are getting from Metro once we meet their conditions with projects. So we can't use it on whatever we want, but we can use it on eligible projects that meet the criteria.
I mean, it's not already budgeted someplace.
Well, $3 million of that 4.5 had been put into the Milwaukee Bay Park project. Basically, Heather would have to provide the date, but several years ago, it had been listed as part of the Metro local share, our contribution in addition to City of Milwaukee local share contribution. That is what has been passed and approved by previous bodies as this was created. But it was passed as, again, kind of a conceptual thing, because we don't have $3 million in our hands. We would have to, again, go through the process, the same as it's been laid out for that Metro local share, whether it's used at Milwaukee Bay Park. But to answer your question, David, we did have 3 of the $4.5 million in the Milwaukee Bay Park project. But there's nothing decided on that was based on, again, remembering Metro's recommendation of what they thought were the most eligible projects that we had.
Thank you, Mike. Mr. Ben.
So we're trying to spend money we don't really have. And Milwaukee Bay project needs the money very soon. So I'm just kind of confused about how this is all working out.
So just a really quick point of clarification, the money is allocated, it's Metro, it's NCPRD's money, but it's not ours until we have a project list and we sign an IGA. That being said, there are some nuances there, and I won't get into many of them, but one of them is we can do it piecemeal. We can do it project by project. Ideally, it'd be more efficient to do it all at once, but we don't have to. So I won't get into a longer answer there, but we certainly could follow up on that later on.
Okay, Ben.
Oh, correct me if I'm wrong. Did we vote and agree on the funding strategy for Milwaukee Bay Park several meetings ago? And then it went to the district, the BCC, and the BCC said, hold on, let's wait on this funding strategy until an IGA is signed. But we already kind of raised our hands and say, yeah, we generally approve moving forward with this funding strategy for Milwaukee Bay Park, which included the local share. And if that's so, then we're kind of backpedaling a little bit versus forward pedaling. Am I correct or incorrect?
I'll address it.
We did have the funding agreement that you all supported and the council passed, and it went to the commission and got supported with a condition. And so the it lists funding sources as potential examples, but it doesn't make the Metro local share commitment, because we couldn't make that commitment until we did the IGA with Metro, if that makes sense. Whether we do it just for one project or 2 projects or 3 projects, we still have to do those intergovernmental agreements with Metro.
Got it. Thanks.
Yeah, good question.
And I'd like to speak to the reality is back in January of 2021, it was promised that we would have a community outreach process. Yes, that $3 million has been listed since 2019 as being slated as a possibility, but approved. It always came back to, we had to have the community outreach that actually set priorities. And we can go back and check all the stuff you want to check on, but it has not ever, first of all, we do not have a CIP. We have a plan that is a draft of an interim to be used to move forward on making our SDC study, but we don't have one of those. And second of all, that $3 million, from my knowledge, is not in the current budget. That's currently going to be approved tomorrow, which is something else I want to make sure we have a chance to talk about tonight, because my understanding tomorrow, the Board of County Commissioners will be approving the budget, and the budget does not include that $3 million. And there's discussion about whether it includes the SDCs, which we haven't got to yet either, because the other part from that January 19th meeting spoke specifically, and we talked about this in our last meeting, that it says that Zone 1 funds that a discussion on the use of Zone 1 funds will inform the amount of such funds proposed for use in the project and NCPRD's annual budget. Well, there is no discussion yet, and it isn't yet included, and that was raised at the budget meeting, and it was Gary Schmidt promised it will not go forward until that happens, until there is that public outreach for those SDCs. So those 2 pieces of money have been listed for a long time, but approved, not from where I'm sitting. Any more comments? Next item. Are you done, Heather? Cool, thanks. I'd like to address the issue about being in the weeds. I'm sorry, the details are not the weeds. This was an opportunity to understand what the current community engagement process is for local share. And it still has more questions for me than it did, not more, but as many questions as we did when we started. So I appreciate we now know more, but we clearly know that It's not a formed process yet. It is to be done. And that's why I'm challenging that timeline by October. How will we do the things that are necessary to be able to actually speak to that by October? That's the big question. I noticed what Anita sent, and that she addressed the same thing. Because Performance Clackamas clearly says that our first step is to identify what are the specific priorities of NCPRD residents and then develop overall plan for addressing those priorities. And we're missing that part. So we can't really move forward like we know that, because there's all of NCPRD and most of them haven't weighed in any manner, shape, or form. I love what Commissioner Savas said. Low income is one of the listed issues for people who have been neglected. And I know there's lots of poverty all around us. And are we satisfying the needs of those folks? Because the link directly to mental health, physical health, etc., and access to nature, documented to the moon and back. And yet, is that how we're making our decisions? We haven't set up a good process.
I would just say, I appreciate your passion.
Thank you.
Right, but you're talking about a hill where water comes down and it was all dug out, and that has nothing to do with how we're going to engage people. So if we're going to talk about engagement, let's think outside of the box. And what's real engagement? You go to the people. We can't sit and wait for them to come to us. So we have to go out. So like, if we're going to talk about engagement, let's talk about engagement.
Yep.
I understand that this hill and all this stuff is important to you, but let's stick to engagement and find out what people really want. So like I said, I appreciate your passion. I would just prefer that we stick to what we're talking about. If we're talking about how do we engage people and what are the thoughtful ways to engage people. And, instead of being lectured here, which I feel like we're being a little bit lectured, and that's where I'm talking about we're getting into the weeds. I just want to stick with what is on the agenda and what's coming up.
Thank you for that. Let me address that comment. This is on the agenda. It is clearly a part of the criteria for the local share. It talks about water quality and the amount of water that comes off that hill. There's no planning for it that we have been able to see whether this would apply, and that wasn't included in the conversation with Metro. That's all I'm saying. And second of all, there was no plan for a park for them to share that had been approved by anybody. So those are two things that I'm saying right off of the criteria haven't yet been addressed. So thank you for your concern about us being in the weeds, but my job is to make sure that the residents of NCPRD are all being represented, not some specialized group that gets it done because we ran out of time. Yes, Ryan. Oh, I'm sorry, Joel, your hand's up.
Grover, I think I think we're ready to move on. I feel like we're getting pretty redundant here. So
Cool.
I would like to suggest we move on to the agenda.
Okay. As long as we're clear that we haven't approved anything, we're still waiting for answers on that. That's fine with me. Okay, unincorporated sub-area outreach process. Does that handout I have, is that available to put up, or can I share screen, or Amanda, can I share screen?
I'm not sure.
Okay.
Sorry, Chair, I'm trying to see if I can share my screen that has that up.
Okay, good. That'd be great.
Um,
I'm now lost in Zoom because I am no longer on where I need to be, and I can't see you guys. There we go. Well, while that's being looked at, I'd like to start with, first of all, talking about what's happened so far. We had our first meeting, and we had a significant amount of great conversation that went on amongst three groups. We had the two groups to the east were combined, and they met together. And if Dave wanted to speak about that, or Maureen wanted to speak about that, they could, but I don't know that we need to hear a review on that. I just want to know that like y'all to know that the process of doing outreach and hearing from residents is taking place. And the opportunity to look at, can you make that bigger? I think, can you go to whole screen or something instead? Anyway, that's good enough. People get the gist of it. If you look at it, it is a design of the DAC in the bottom center there is at the confluence, if you will, of all 5 sub areas. And there are 2 representatives from each representing approximately 22,000 people. And we are, again, jealous of what Milwaukee has been able to do for the years that they've been able to do. They have in place a board that actually does function to represent the people in their district, excuse me, in their sub area. Whereas the rest of us are working on it, and we are living with and functioning in a Board of County Commissioner approved process to have a interim volunteer outreach committee to specifically focus on how we can reach the broader corners. And we've done a significant amount of doing that. The fact that and thanks NCPRD and staff, that the Justice property is being listed, and that the new urban property is being listed, and that the Jennings Lodge school property is still being carried over, are all important. I'd sooner you stay on the chart we were just on. Yeah, that one. Anyway, but this is all in a process is to restore us to being a whole district. And we are in the process from our very first DAC meeting, and still including, we are in the process of trying to retire the funding segregated zones, which allows areas like zone 1, zone 2, or zone 3 to keep money within their own zone, as opposed to, as the district was formed, as one whole district representing everyone, and everyone had an input on that. So that's the part we're still racing to get done. And do we have any update on that, Mike, as far as that process? Are we still good for the fall? You're not muted.
Sorry, which process are you talking about?
The retiring of the zone system that.
Are you talking the SDC methodology?
Well, that's the step that seemingly has to be done before we can do it. I don't know why, and I got a lot of other people who didn't know why, but if we have to do that, are we still on track to having this fall be when that's ready to be able to retire the zones?
Heather's going to give you all a report here during our updates on the SDC methodology.
Okay, good. And particularly, Heather, in mind with, how does that reflect to being able to be in place to retire the zones? The next thing that has to be discussed as part of the methodology. That is the general direction that things are going, but it is not a separate issue. The SDC methodology is determining whether we are zonal or non-zonal. New news to me, and I think we need to have more discussions about that, because in truth, the consensus was the zones violated the agreement to have one district. We in fact had 3 districts with 3 different funding, and as you noticed, Happy Valley left with $14.3 million and 9 fully paid for parks using that system, which doesn't work for all the rest of us. So that is the concern, is a few.
Well, Chair, I'm not sure what this has to do with the recruitment topic that we're on.
Well, that actually has a lot to do with what comes up in most of the conversations, is to talk about how, in fact, we can return to being one district with a joint purpose, as opposed to 3 sub-zones, all with their own funding requirements and their own funding choices. That's how that does. So then the next piece is, do you guys want to talk now, or can I finish?
Yeah.
I can finish?
No,
Okay,
no.
good. Thank you. So the idea is that we have the
No,
two-way.
I'd like to actually talk. I'd actually
Oh,
like.
I missed that. I didn't know what
Thank you.
yeah meant. Okay, good.
Yeah,
Please
yeah,
go
yeah.
ahead.
That means I want to talk.
All right.
I would really love for us to just talk about, stay really focused on. I feel like we're kind of going all over the place. And Grover, I really actually really appreciate you, and I appreciate the work you're doing. I just want to tell you that straight up. I'd like us just to talk about the outreach process. I don't want us to go back and keep rehashing history that we've already heard many, many times. It's taking up time and it's keeping us from focusing on the really important stuff like the recruitment and talking about infrastructure improvements and all the items on the agenda. So could we just really focus on sub-area outreach and the process and all the great people that are applying for this?
Okay.
Thank you.
We do not have an update currently as to the information as far as the number of applicants, as well as the number of pre-registered, because when I made my inquiry to Jessica, it comes back that she's out of office and she'll get back to us next week. So I don't know what it is. I could tell you what it was last week. And last week,
As far as I'm aware, Chair, it has not changed. Because
Including-
we send out updates to, I believe the whole DAC was getting, anytime we get a new recruitment or a new
Okay.
person that's applied.
Okay, good. Very good. So we have sufficient at the moment and still room for more in each of the 3 sub areas that have the opportunity to select. The meeting is going to be on June 15th, and the short version of what the meeting is, it will be a very brief group discussion to talk about what we're doing, and hopefully within 15 minutes, 20 on the outside, we will break into the 4 sub areas, 3 of which will be working on specifically meeting their candidates and discussing what's important to them, and then taking their vote. And we'll have NCPRD will have the ballots for each of the subgroups to be able to be launched in each of the sub areas to get the votes from each of those groups. And the idea is to have the sub areas continue their work to support determining and identifying what the priorities are of NCPRD residents, as opposed to more spot check methodology. That's the end of that. Do you have any questions? My request of any of you who have friends, neighbors, relatives who live in the sub area 1, 2, 3, or 4, but particularly 1, 3, and 4, please encourage them to participate and pre-register so they'll have access to the information about the applicants, because by pre-registering, they become a member of the Board of Directors approved process of being the nominating committee for their own sub area, and will be able to express their support for who they want to forward to the district advisory, to the Board of Directors for appointment to be their representative. Okay, good. Any other questions? Thank you. Next item. Concord infrastructure improvements.
Okay, thank you, Chair. I don't have a report for you. This kind of came up not last minute, but later than we're still pulling information together on this. Really what this was is I wanted to be able to get ahead of you all, or get this in front of you all before our June 29th NCPRD board meeting, where I wanted to discuss it with the board. But the basic gist of the discussion and what I'd love feedback on is with the decision from the Board of County Commissioners to separate the Concord building and the library as separate buildings, and then to finish the design, but put the project on hold until prices stabilize, hopefully within the next year. What I was looking at is I've still got needed infrastructure repairs and improvements that need to be done on the Concord building that can be done independently of the civil work and parking lot and park and playground projects. Do not have to be tied to the library construction part. Those items, just very briefly, are a roof replacement, which we've known is needed. We have both a flat roof and a peaked roof. So the roof replacement, a seismic upgrade, and in talking with the OPSIS seismic folks, there is a roof level bolts and bolts plus, I think they call it, seismic upgrade that would greatly increase the stability and would be best done when we're replacing the roof, since it involves resheathing and all kinds of stuff. And then the third one is the fact that anybody that's been in the building knows we don't have any kind of an air handling system other than windows. We don't, so it gets pretty stuffy. And so as part of the original project, there was a design for putting an air handling system into the building. So with those three, also included in what I'm proposing to be considered is putting the elevator in that was originally envisioned on the other end of the building, so that when the library is built, we'll have an more accessible entrance on that side. And then with the HVAC or mechanical, electrical, plumbing upgrades, we need a new electrical service panel, a few other things. I've asked OPSIS to do their best to kind of parse out those bits and pieces into a consolidated form. And right now, it looks like it should be right around $4.5 to $5 million to do all of that, which would get us, again, new roof, new air handling, new electrical system, new electrical panels, seismic upgrade, and a new elevator into the building. The elevator is about the only part of the ones that aren't really an infrastructure repair or improvement, but I do think that it's important, and there would be additional seismic stabilizing on that during that part of the project as well. And again, having a second elevator in the building and a newer elevator seems like a good idea, and again, could tie into when they're going up and building the shaft up in the roof. So altogether, like I said, $4.5 to $5 million is the estimate. It's not a firm number, but in this year's budget that is set to be approved tomorrow, I had put an additional $4 million of some of our reserve funding into the Concord project specifically, and we are still able to use SDCs on those portions of those improvements as well. And so we essentially would have that money to be able to move forward sooner rather than later. So that's what I would like to do. That's what I'm recommending. I wanted to kind of poll you all or get your all's opinion, and with the intention that I'll be bringing it to the board on the 29th for them to discuss as well. And that's the end of my summary.
Great. Deborah, do you want to go ahead?
Just that I, having had meetings in the Concord school and having toured it and all, I know those improvements are drastically needed. It's not some kind of, excessiveness to be able to stand, to be in that building during hot times. So I totally support that. It's really a necessary thing.
Thank you. And Mike, I echo what Deborah had to say. The only thing I want to say is what I'm unclear about, and this may not be in this section, but I'm unclear about how the site design, so the actual building and working on it, you're right, that's not affected by it, but any part of site design, et cetera, because I even heard you say so that, the elevator would be closer to the library. Well, that's a presumption, and it's a very good one, so I don't disagree with that. But what are the plans for looking at, I won't talk about the water now, but to talk about how the site is going to be formed, because it is the side of a hill and it already has a pretty excessive drop, et cetera. Where does that fit in, and how does the combined NCPRD and library Concord Task Force have a chance to move, while we won't be making any firm plans and we're not going to spend any money, but if there's no room for design, then we won't be able to, move forward at all, to be able to move forward when we can, when the money does get to be more affordable.
Right. Yeah. And you know, the beauty of the Concord school, well, there's a lot of beauty to the Concord school, but one of the beautiful things about the Concord school is it's a big old building and it's not going to move.
Yep.
So everything else is built, is going to be built and developed around it. And the short answer is really the civil work that you're talking about, the earth moving and contouring, that's all going to be decided as part of where the library winds up being decided to sit, and at what elevation, and whether it's higher or lower than was originally looked at. That's going to drive the where the library sits is also then obviously going to drive the topography of whatever park space there, or you know how much, where the parking lot has to start or end. But that's all part of that part, and that's the recognition that, you know, this improvement that we would be doing, this is just to the building itself. But once the library design gets finished and a location is picked and they're moving forward with that, that's when the design for all that civil and earthwork will get figured out. It doesn't affect us on this part, other than part of the project for the elevator included creating the new entryway there at that side. And I'm recommending we don't do that, because that would require us to do a whole bunch of earthwork that we don't know is going to be warranted or in the right spot or any of that. So
Good
I'm
plan.
just putting the elevator in, and then we'll figure the entryway part out again as part of the overall big project once it gets picked back up.
Great point. I couldn't agree with all of the things you just said. That's perfect. My only concern is, and I don't want an answer now, but I'd like to plant the seed, that the issue is the Concord Concord Property Library Planning Task Force is still alive, and it is 3/4 NCPRD and 1/4 library. And so I don't want an answer now, but we're going to have to look at how that can move forward as opposed to not. So thank you for that. Any other questions, comments? Thank you, Mike. That was great. And you're right, the building's not likely to move. All right, next issue, changes of status and updates, Milwaukee Bay Park, Concord, SDC methodology, NCPRD funding, and system plan and CIP timelines.
Commissioner Savas, did you have your hand up?
Yeah, I thought before I moved on, I put something in the chat as a question. And I thought about it, Mike, when you were talking about the improvements and particularly the elevator. When I think of that, of course, I think about the folks with disabilities. So is there adequate ADA access to the building today?
Yes. Yeah, on the Concord Street, Concord Road side of the building, there's an ADA accessible entryway with the proper ramping that goes right into the elevator. They can either go down the hall on the main level or go into the elevator to get up to the second level. And then, unfortunately, to get down on the other end of the building, there's a ramp system to get them up to that kind of, it's like a half step tier up to that far hallway, but it is all ADA accessible. The only thing that I'm not sure of that we're still measuring is some of the restrooms I don't think meet ADA accessibility standards as far as stall sizes and turnarounds and doorway widths. So we're still looking at that, but the building itself is accessible.
Yeah, well, yeah, I appreciate that, Mike. And maybe I didn't use the right word in the chat, and maybe the up-to-date standards, if you will, for ADA, because we're certainly fighting that on the transportation side of the world, where we've been challenged in court and they prevailed. And so meeting today's standards for ADA access is what I was really trying to get at.
Yeah, and I've gone in and done my own measurements on the entryways and access points as specifically, and those are adequate. But it was in that measurement that I was questioning whether some of the restrooms, because I don't know how school rules were. They have to keep up with general ADA, but I think with the youth restrooms and stuff, there may not have been evidence of specific ADA stalls. So as far as I am aware, I keep up on ADA standards. Our access it's adequate. I'll say that. The new entry plaza that's planned as part of the combined project was a much more easily accessible entryway that wouldn't require the ramping because the elevator would actually take them up to the half level floor. And it would be, you know, a much more modern elevator. But it is adequate as far as meeting ADA standards.
Okay, great. Mike, and the only other thing, I'll just, you don't have to answer me today, but I'm just wondering, there's adequate signage for those that are trying to get to the building that have ADA challenges, that there's signage that directs them to where they can access the building the safest. So
Yes, there
I'll
there
just-
is at the front main entrance and at the entrance where the elevator is, and I believe at the other entrance, there are signs that say ADA accessible entrance with arrows.
Okay, thank you.
Excellent. Thank you, Mike.
So I'll for our updates, the first several, I think many of them are Heather's updates. So she's back on here. Heather, wherever you were going to start.
Sure. All right, just testing. Can you guys hear me and see that screen?
Yes.
Yes, ma'am.
Okay. So this is in your packet. I won't go over the details, but it's just a nice summary of the engagement for Milwaukee Bay Park. And this was just for the 50% design development phase, which was a major milestone, kind of picking design back up and starting to get some specifics. But what I really wanted to talk about tonight was just a very high level snapshot of where we are. The design development is now complete. It was, the drawings were completed last week. And there are some next near-term steps. One is, this is the time period through June 21st for support for the Metro Trails Grant, which I'll talk about in just a moment. We as a staff and as partners on the project team are going to be reviewing the completed design and providing feedback to guide the design team. We'll also be getting a revised cost estimate. Again, this is keeping the project on target, so we aren't designing something that we can't build. We're getting ready to submit for a land use review. That's through the city of Milwaukee. They're the ones with the land use authority in this case. And also submitting for ODOT review because we have area that's in ODOT right of way where the trolley trail realignment is. And then finally, we'll be preparing construction documents. The Metro Trails Grant, I haven't had a chance to update you guys on that. When there was a technical evaluation done on all the applications, this project received very high rankings. It was second highest rated construction project overall, and rated best in every category, which includes equity, safety, climate, and trails. It was only one of 3 projects proposed for Metro Trails funding within the Clackamas County region. So I'm hoping with success that we can be part of Clackamas County really accessing these funds, which just feels regionally significant. Did you need to interrupt, Ryan?
Just a quick question. That's the highest ranked of all the counties, right?
Yes, second highest rated construction project for the Trails Bond, in particular, which is just a nuance because this particular application process was for both Trails Bond funding and another federal fund, which we
everybody, that's a big deal. That's a huge deal.
So it was ranked very highly, but it's also very highly competitive, and the public input really matters. This is technical, but the Metro also wants to hear from the public and from constituents about what they want to prioritize. So this is in your packet. You can go online and look at the different projects. I'd love you to take a look at this one and see if you're excited about a thumbs up for it. Again, it's highly competitive. Not all projects will be funded. So you can take a survey. You can find other way to submit comments. You could forward it to friends. You could really do a deep dive if you like getting in the weeds. But I'm very glad that this project could be competitive and be a good match for these funds. So that's all I have on Milwaukee Bay Park tonight. Mike, do you want me to just say
I have a question.
Oh, sorry.
That's okay. I am curious, if I remember correctly, does this require a match?
Yes, it does. It requires a 40% match.
Which was about how much?
It's 624,000 request with the balance. I'm sorry, I don't have the numbers in front of me,
I think
but it's 500, under 600,000.
Yeah, 540, 560,000,
Yeah.
some for the
Thank you.
match.
Okay, and have we determined where that match is coming from yet?
The plan was to use SDC funding or other funding if SDCs were not available. But I believe we would be using SDC funding. That's part of the match that we were aligning for all of the grants was from SDCs.
Okay, good.
And that's what we reflected in our grant application as well when we were putting that forward. But
Right.
when things decided on that, the decision would come from the board when it came time to actually make the match.
The final decision always comes from the board, but does this body have a chance to weigh in on it? Because that is a topic that we have covered before. Sorry about sounding like the weeds again, but in truth, those SDCs, and I'm sorry Mo had to drop off because she actually had a presentation she was going to make during the DAC member updates reports. But the area that she lives in, that they are, I don't know if you've been following, but they're pretty darn concerned about how few parks they have in that area. And in that process, the SDCs would come out of their UGMA, their Urban Growth Management Area SDCs, not the city of Milwaukee's SDCs, both of which make up Zone 1 SDCs. So it would, that's the way it was before, and there was a lot of concern about that, and it hasn't been resolved yet.
And again, that's why I answered Grover when we put the application forward, which was a quick turnaround. You all saw it, and then it went to the board. We put SDCs, but when it comes time, if we are actually awarded the grant, then we'll have to go through a process. And I am sure that since it's budgetarily related, it would come to the DAC with a recommendation that you would put up to the board on whether it's SDCs or whether it's general fund or whether there's some other funding source that's identified.
That's right. I just want to make sure that everyone who is here is aware of those nuances that are sitting there. I totally get it, and it's not a surprise, and it's been discussed before, but that goes along with that. So congratulations on your high rating, and we'll look forward to moving forward on that later. So that was that part. Do you have other parts?
Well, I didn't have any Concord update other than what we had already talked about. So Heather, would you talk about SDC methodology?
Yes, there's basically, sorry, I'm trying to bring up notes and I've got them buried in another screen. Give me just a second here.
Ryan, does your question want to slip in here while she's looking? Okay, good.
No, I was just gonna make, I'm like, yeah, it beat out my project that I had for the agency I work for, which is fine because I live over here, but darn you, Heather.
Sorry, Ryan. I'm sure
That's
it's
off
a
the
very
record.
worthy project. So the SDC process is still moving forward, albeit a little slower than we'd like, just due to the complexity of data requests and our shortage of staffing. We are doing refinement on our data gathering, talking with FCS about what the holes are in a couple of the data inputs that we still need. And then they'll pretty quickly this month be going into developing a draft analysis. And our hope is to bring that to the DAC tentatively in August for review. And if things are pretty straightforward and the DAC has comments, it's possible we could turn that around by the next meeting or the meeting after. That brings us to September, October timeline. And at that point, we could move pretty quickly to the SDC ordinance and bringing it to the board for a presentation, a notice period, and a hearing. So we are continuing that methodology. It is a big lift with the doing it kind of apart from the system plan, but we're moving forward.
Great.
And FCS, for the question in the audience, is the consultant that is working on the SDC methodology.
And they'll be presenting that draft when they come. So you'll have the experts at the table.
Okay.
Okay. I don't have the agenda up in front of me. Are there any other things I need to cover, Mike?
funding?
No,
and system
NCPRD
plan?
the only report I had on funding was to talk about that. Yeah, tomorrow the budget is going before the Board of County Commissioners and NCPRD board for adoption. As it was presented, there was some minor adjustments that had to be made for some interfund things, but the overall budget number has not changed at all. We had our budget hearing a few weeks ago with some questions and some clarifications. So we will see what happens tomorrow.
Okay. On that note, I'd like to at least raise, I don't know how many people in this meeting, but in our last meeting we had together, we were unaware that, but it certainly came up in that budget meeting you were just talking about, that the city of Milwaukee has initiated going through exploring their withdrawal from NCPRD, and their attorney is with NCPRD's attorney working on what the mediation requirements are, et cetera. So when I keep watching this stuff move forward, and yet we know that there is this discussion about withdrawing, I have concerns because in that very budget meeting, there was the $2.351 million of Zone 1 UGMA, Urban Growth Management Area funds that are being attributed to Milwaukee Bay Park. And yet that's not yet resolved because we have not done the promised outreach, which I could read you again what it is, but it's outreach using community involvement and community engagement before that stuff gets released. So I'm kind of stuck and I don't know where to go with it, but I don't want people in this meeting, like in our last meeting, to not know what was going on, not publicly in the meeting, but certainly was publicly at the budget meeting.
Chair, I can't speak to the UGMA because we've talked about that and answered it already. What I can say is that our budget is moving forward. Hopefully, as we've presented, yes, there are questions on how to use SDC monies. That's why we're having an SDC methodology study. But until and unless something does happen, I move forward with, we need to keep things moving forward. And I want to be very, very clear. There was nothing initiated on withdrawal. The only thing that happened was that the city council directed the city manager to explore what withdrawal options are. And that is it. We are not, the mediation is to specifically discuss the method of withdrawal because there's a conflict between language, but not about actual mediating the withdrawal. So I need to be very clear on that. I am working with the city of Milwaukee on looking at what some of those options are. It's not them working in a vacuum. Even there are options that could still include lots of different things. So the conversation has just begun, but that any of those conversations that happen and with any result that may or may not happen in the future doesn't change the fact that I've got projects that need to keep moving forward on their timelines until I'm told that they can't.
Good. Appreciate it. That was more to make sure everyone else was informed because I don't think everyone attends all the same. I don't call them obscure, but anyway, the multitude of meetings, I don't know how staff keeps up with all the meetings, but we do our best out here. Thank you.
I would like to say thank you, Michael. That was perfect. That's exactly what we did. And your explanation was right on point. So thank you.
Thank you.
Okay, still looking at changes or status updates. Next would be the system plan and the CIP timeline.
Okay, well, we still don't have a definitive timeline for the system plan because we still are two planners short in our planning division. However, Heather and I have been talking, and the first action that we're going to be taking as soon as we possibly can, and which to me, I hope means within the next couple of months, is initiating the paperwork to go out to bid for just handling, and we've talked briefly about this, but just handling the needs assessment part of the systems plan in whole. because all of us, no matter how much outreach we do, we know we're not reaching everybody. And so we need some science behind us to have a statistically validated survey that goes out, that's based on meetings with stakeholders and members of the public and focus groups that then give us, you, me, the board account, the NCPRD board and everybody else, actual real data on what the citizens within the district want, need, how they use parks, where they see needs in both services and all of that. And so that to me is a top priority, to stop guessing and actually get the real information. So we're going to be, and part of that is really focusing on this equity and inclusion of how we reach out to all of these different aspects of the community, however it wants to be divided out. But we know that these underrepresented voices need to be heard. And so we know that it's not going to be a super quick, nor is it going to be a super inexpensive process to get this data. But to me, I think that's needed. And quite honestly, some of the data that we get from the needs assessment is also going to help somewhat drive the CIP process, because they are very much tied. People are going to be talking about what their needs are and what they want, and all of that will then be presented as well. So that's the plan right now. Even if we get a planner on staff tomorrow, there's still a lot of lead time to bring that person up to speed and get them where they're going. So we're going to try and get that process started soonest rather than later.
Thank you. Yes, Ryan.
Yeah, thank you, Grover. So just a couple items on the system plan. Thank you for the update, Michael. I do want to emphasize, so that's something that I've done for 22 years, and the pre-planning is so important. So for us to just jump into system planning could be very dangerous. I've done that and it turned out to be really messy. So pre-planning is a big deal. Giving the staff time to really process how are we going to, especially equity-based, takes a lot of layers. I would at some point for the group, I would love to present the IAP to spectrum of public participation, just to really discuss with us as a group. I've been hearing a lot of discussion about public participation and grassroots efforts and everything like that. I think it'd be a really great quick presentation to explain where the agency actually is and what that participation looks like and how to get to a what we call an empowerment place. My agency has gone from what we call the inform, which is the centralized control, and we're moving to the middle. That's a huge lift. To get to empowerment where citizens are owning it, it's a lot of work and it takes a lot of preparation. So I would love at some point for the group, if they'd be open to just do a quick presentation discussion about that.
Great. I agree with all that you just said, and the lift is huge. And the part that I don't want to let go by is, if for all of you, I assume got the email that Anita sent out, and I really want to thank her for that, because it included the link to the Oregon Parks Strategic Master Plan, and they have 100 pages of appendix that talk about hard data about not someplace out there, no, Oregon, statistics on people in poverty, people in certain age groups, people in certain ethnic groups, et cetera, et cetera. And I don't know that we even at this point know, and since we are operating as sub areas, what is the mix within our sub areas of economics? What is our mix of age group? What is our mix of participation? Those are all things that if it all takes place just in the staff, then we just kind of have to wait and see how it turns out, as opposed to being an active part. Now, I spent 25 years working in community-based engagement work, and it does require out there talking to people, not a great plan only. And I couldn't agree with you more about the importance of having good planning. But when does the sub areas, and I want to use one as a quick example, time me less than a minute. In the original model of NCPRD, there were in fact 5 sub areas, and each one of them had their own district advisory committee made up of local residents, and each of them then sent one of their members to be on the regional board. And through that, they zipped up from non-existent with support from the county to becoming functional, and they made the first master plan all in short order because they had that whole network of participation. And that's the part I don't want us to ignore as we go forward. That's all I'm going to say. That's probably less than a minute.
Yeah, and I'll just reply to that. That's why I think it's great to start with the IAP2 spectrum of public participation, and really talking about of making sure that it's not a particular group that's leading, not saying that it has been, just saying that this is what 22 years of this, it's very involved people that are of a specific group that they dictate to an overall group. And we want to avoid that. We want to make sure that we have a nice sampling of our entire community. And getting to that model takes time, and it takes a lot of planning, and it takes relying on, there's a lot of expertise out there, and trusting some of that expertise and actually paying for that expertise. So I think we can get into it later. But there are a lot of options out there, and I'm telling you that this isn't some uphill battle you have to each fight alone. There's a lot of options, and we can get there.
Yes, Anita. Thank you, Brian.
Ryan, what is the IP2 spectrum on public participation?
I will send you it. It looks like this. I'll send you the link.
For all of us?
It really talks about going from a centralized control to completely empowering community. And there's positives and negatives to all of that. And those are all things that like we can talk about as a group, or we can talk about separately and not in meetings and just like and geek out about. But it's a really good place to start. I don't want to step on Heather's toes because she's the planning goddess. So I don't want to, but that's an option, right?
Yeah, I'd love for you to present all that to us.
Okay, great. And thanks for posting that, Desi. I captured it. Teamwork. I love it. I love it. Okay, so then that leads our CIP timeline. And so what's the scoop? I assume that finished the system plan part. You're muted, Mr. Mike.
Yeah, no, the CIP timeline is, I talked about that as part of the system plan. The needs assessment is going to help drive it, but the CIP is part of the system plan. We can't really do that separate until we understand what we've got and what people want and all of that needs assessment stuff. So again, that timeline is, we don't really need it separated out. The system plan and the CIP are one and the same. We'll be producing all of that kind of all together. So
okay, good, thanks. Then that, any more on the changes, status, and updates? Going one price sold. Okay, now it's time for public comment. And who do I look to for assistance in this? Is that you, Amanda, or is that Mike?
I can keep track on it too. So if there's anybody that wants to speak during the meeting, please, that are in the attendees section, please raise your hand. And I'm not seeing anybody raise their hand, Chair.
Okay. Very good. Next is the DAC member reports.
Oh,
Heather, yes.
Oh.
I'm sorry, I did see a raised hand in
Yeah,
the attendees.
just popped up on mine. I think I've got a little lag. Jeanette DeCastro would like to speak.
Yes, Jeanette. Let's see, I haven't seen her appear yet. Who's doing that?
Amanda, you just need to bring her over into the room, I believe. There we go.
There we go. I see her name. And she's unmuted. Go ahead, Jeanette.
Oh, hi, good evening. So I'm hoping to get some more understanding about the SDC topic, but it may not be a good time to keep talking about it. Just in a basic way, are the SDCs passed through Clackamas County when development applications come in? And then the next question is, what proportion of the funding for the district overall is from SDCs? And I can dive into the budget if that's at a later time. I'll wrap it up there.
Our SDCs are collected by ordinance and state law. There's a collection method. It's collected by Clackamas County and City of Milwaukee, and then say that, Heather, you were muted, please.
Yeah, and Happy Valley for properties that they've annexed since we set the district boundary.
So we collect the SDCs and they're in a separate set of funds by zone. So there's 3 different SDC funds with a 4th one in that UGMA that is part of the zone, but is accounted for separately. But beyond that, we don't operate the district on SDC funds in the traditional sense. Those are for capital development dollars. The only part that I guess could be partially considered funded is when staff are working on SDC eligible projects, they're charging against the SDCs for that staff time. But we don't use any portion of SDC collection for operations. Did that answer those, hopefully?
Yes, thank you.
All right.
And are there any more hands raised?
I do not see any, Chair.
Okay. Thank you, Jeanette, and thank you those in attendance. Now we're at DAC member reports. And who would like to go first?
I'll go ahead. June 18th, Milwaukee's having their 2nd annual Juneteenth celebration at Water Tower Park. It'll be from 11 to 3. We chose Water Tower Park this year because we wanted to focus on kids, and kids can play at the park. We'll have vendors, food, carnival games, and a couple like face painting stuff for kids as well. So come on out Saturday, June 18th, 11 to 3 at Water Tower Park.
Thank you. Okay, Dave, you're up, sir.
Okay, I'm going to report in our subcommittee meeting. At the last time we were, Maureen, Grover and I were set aside to look at the naming for the Boardman Wetlands area. And Maureen was going to do it, but she's not available. I guess her internet was down. So I'm going to go ahead and read what we had come up with. And I'm here to report on the subcommittee findings regarding the naming of the wetlands area and the Jennings Lodge area. Our findings are the following. Of the public responses received, 20 indicated they most support the name Boardman Wetlands Nature Park. 16 indicated they most support the name Boardman Wetlands Natural Area. And 7 indicated they equally support both names above. And 2 people indicated they most support the name Boardman Wetlands Nature Area. Following the NCPRD Parks and Facilities naming process, we're recommending above 3 names in order of preference for the DAC's consideration. It says the DAC shall select 1 preferred name and 1 alternate name for the recommendation to the Board of Directors for consideration. The Board of Directors may approve the name, or approve the alternative name, or request up to 2 additional alternatives from the DAC. And finally, they have the ability to select a different name at the sole discretion. I would like to make a motion this time to have the park naming item added to the next agenda. It's an action item, and that our members consider these submissions to be prepared to vote on at our July 13th meeting. I'm done.
I hear the motion, and is there a second? Deborah, is there a second for those who are recording those things? Good. Any discussion? Thank you for that, Dave, by the way.
So
Joel,
wait, just to clarify, so we're making a motion to add this to the agenda?
Correct, as an action item to
Oh.
be voted
Oh,
on
I see.
at
Okay.
the next time.
Okay, I didn't, fair enough.
Yeah, it's right. To add it to the
Yeah,
June
this is-
15th agenda as an action item, and that our members consider these submissions to be prepared to vote on the January 13th meeting.
Yeah, we're trying to follow the naming policy that was put down in the, the little issue paper they had.
Excellent, David. Okay, so any more discussion? Okay. Do we just have do we have enough people? Yeah, Joel, your hand's up.
Yeah, I'm waiting to do a DAC member report, so I had my hand up.
Okay,
I
no
didn't know there was a
problem.
motion.
Good. Okay, so there was a motion and a second and discussion, so now we'll vote. So it'd be easiest, since we're all on screen, other than Ben, there he is. If you're, all those in favor of the motion, please raise your hand where we can see it. Okay, it is 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8 unanimous. 8 out of 8. So I won't ask for the other kinds of choices. It passes 8-0. Thank you all for that. Thank you, Dave, for doing that. Thank you for Maureen. Sorry she couldn't be here. Next, you're up, Joel.
Thank you. Wanted to let everyone know, or remind you, or hopefully you already know, the Milwaukee Community Center Foundation is putting on, again, after a 2-year hiatus, I believe, the Clackamas on Tap and Uncorked event on Saturday, June 25th from 5 p.m. to 9 p.m. I believe Michael is ready to guarantee it will be sunny that night, so we can hold him accountable for the weather. He is a Renaissance man, so maybe he's doing weather. But I want to encourage everyone to please share this information with your groups. There will be live music, a barbecue, local vendor, or local food and wine and beer. It's a ticketed event. I don't remember the exact tickets. In fact, I'm going to put up the website to everyone. There are also plenty of volunteer options. So if attending is not your jam, and you want to just do a few hours of volunteering, your group or whoever, they could desperately use volunteers for this event. This is a benefit for the Meals on Wheels program and nutrition program that's run out of the Milwaukee Community Center and serves our entire district. And it's their largest fundraiser for this. So I would really encourage everyone to at least share, if not try to volunteer or attend or buy some raffle tickets, whatever. But check out the website. It has more information on details of the event. And again, Michael is guaranteeing that sunshine, so that'll be nice. The only other thing I would like to kind of throw in on the member report here is I would still like to throw out the question or suggestion that maybe in-person meetings is something we start considering. Personally, I'm really tired of Zoom, and I think we would be maybe more productive as a group if we're sitting in a room together. I know it's also inconvenient. We've all gotten used to this, but I really would be curious to know if that is something we could consider doing. And if so, what would be a timeline on that? I'm sure that's directed more obviously to Michael or staff on that, but if no one else shares my opinion, that's fine too. But I wanted to throw it back out there. Thank you.
Thank you, Joel. Desi, you're up.
Yeah, Joe, I just want this is a family-friendly event.
It is, yes. There's going to be some lawn games, things like that. In the past, this has been a kind of a beer and wine sampling thing, been the most of the focus, but even then it was a sort of family-friendly. This is actually more of a live music dinner. There will be beer and wine, but there'll also be other things, I think ice cream, stuff like that too. And of course, it's at the Sarah Height Rose Garden, which is right there next to the Milwaukee Community Center, which is right there next to North Clackamas Park. So it's a terrific venue, and it should be a lot of fun. So I would encourage you to at least check it out, even with kids.
Okie doke. Go ahead, Ryan. I'll go after you.
Yeah, so if I volunteered, can I sneak? Never mind. Okay, never mind.
You actually do get I think a free cup and maybe a t-shirt. So if you do volunteer, I think you would have to probably do the early shift, but you probably can't in any event. Yeah, check out the website though. There's all that information there.
As far as the meeting in person, I'm not in favor of that because, case in point, I'm in my 7th day of COVID as we sit, and I am double vaccinated with the Pfizer and double boosted with the Pfizer, and I'm a breakthrough case of COVID, and I don't go into businesses, et cetera, without wearing sufficient masks, and somehow it managed to get in and get me. So, and I am in my mid 70s, and it is not okay. And the whole veteran world has turned out to help me get the drugs I need, et cetera. But the point of it is, COVID is not behind us. I appreciate there's lots of young, healthy people, but you're all carriers, and that's the problem. So I just, I didn't know this was humorous, but it's what's true. And so I'm not in a big hurry to go back to that until we in fact don't have 100,000 people a day coming down with COVID. So that's it for me on that topic. Thank you for bringing it up, Joel. I'm very tired of this, but if it wasn't this, I wouldn't be in this meeting. Next persons to speak. Okay. No more district member reports. Okay. District monthly report.
Well, you've all had the report from this past month, and I only had a couple of things that I wanted to add on to that. More rah-rahs for the district, starting with a couple of weeks ago, I think it was. I was honored to be able to accept the Riffle Award for NCPRD. The Riffle Award is the award given out by the Johnson Creek Watershed Council, and we were the agents, the distinguished agency partner of the year. So I was able to accept the Riffle Award, and really all the credit goes to Tanya and her amazing work with what she does on conservation and all of those restoration efforts. But that was a really fun event. I got to meet a whole bunch of Watershed Council folks, and it was a good time. The other one was just happened today. I don't know if any of you get the National Recreation and Park Association kind of newsletter, e-newsletter, but I believe it was the Clackamas Review wrote an article about our Science in the Park program that's coming up this weekend. That's going to be out at the Boardman area, and I forget the Mill Creek. I think may have gotten that wrong. So Clackamas Review wrote those up, wrote up a nice article. It was picked up. I don't know if we sent it or somehow the National Rec and Park Association put it out on their national newsletter. And I even had a couple of director colleagues of mine send me messages today saying, "Hey, we saw North Clackamas Parks in the news." So that's really great to be highlighted for the work that we're doing in our science and nature programs. So that's again another Tanya effort that is out there in the public. Staff in general, just the rest of the division report staff is fully involved in the summer activities and programs and everything. As you saw, we've got Recmobile kicking off at the end of this month. We've got movies in the park. We're planning for our September cultural event, and just everything else that goes on with keeping the parks up and green and mowed and safe and clean, garbage removed and all of that. So things are busy, but with all of that, the administrative work doesn't stop, and that's where myself and the rest of our staff are working a lot behind the scenes with everything from the budget to procurement requests and contracts that need to be signed for services for all of the stuff that goes on. It's just generally this kicks off our busiest, not that we're never not busy, but our busiest frenetic time. And with that, a lot of people are off getting ready, doing vacations and other family obligations. And with that, I'll end on, I will be gone next week, but staff is fully capable of keeping this place running without me, as they like to remind me constantly. No, I'm just kidding. But I'm going to be in Northern Idaho next week teaching laughter yoga to a week-long adult leadership development summer camp. So super fun. Needed good time to get away and decompress for a good week up in the Coeur d'Alene area. With that, if there's any questions about any of the stuff in the staff reports, please let me know.
Okay.
Awesome. Thanks for all things you all do.
Okay. I did have one question, and I'm so again, I'm back to being sub-area 1 representative, one of the two, but it's under the asset development. It talks about it's an asset development program, and it manage current and long-range planning, acquisition of land. And what I'm really curious about is, and it also has that the capital repair and replacement will be in a different section, but those are all things that were listed in the local share, but that really raised a question. I appreciated reading through that report of what local share calls for and its criteria. There's a multitude of things in NCPRD that could be addressed by that were not Concord or Jennings Lodge or Milwaukee Bay Park. Like, as an example, the restoration and the uptake on the keep on the existing parks, et cetera, and the equipment, et cetera. The part about being more green in how we use our equipment. Those were all things that were clearly identified in there. And I just want to make sure when it says there's an asset development program, is that something we're going to be able to see and look at, including the part about acquisition of parklands? Because I know for a fact there have been a number of places that have been recommended as potential land, and yet I don't know how the process inside of NCPRD, because the recommendations went in and nothing comes back out over the last many years. So there's nobody's guilty, but I am curious what the process is. Because case in point, we lost 4 acres of riverfront property that was available, and no one looked into it.
Well, I'm a bit I'm trying to figure out how to frame the response, because you and I talked about this, and you're kind of acting like we hadn't had this conversation.
No, but the rest of the people haven't had this conversation, Mike. I appreciate that. But what you and I talk about is one thing, but the reality is it affects all of us.
Well, right, but as I had explained to you, yes, we technically have an asset development program. Heather is in charge of our asset development division, or planning and development, as we're going to be calling it. But as I explained to you, no, everybody can see. You can look at the budgets from year to year, going back however long you want. We haven't actually done any separate funding for land acquisition, which is a possible way to do that. We don't have a process that the county or the district has in place if a property becomes available. And as I explained to you, that's my intention to develop those. But so no, we don't. And thanks for pointing that out that way. We will be developing it. How it's going to come out, you're all going to be involved. The board will be involved. Staff will be making recommendations on how to do that. But ultimately, the lack of us acquiring property in the past bears nothing on how I'm trying to handle things in the future. And ultimately, I'm not the one that makes a decision on whether we acquire a property or not. That's made by the board. And so if things are brought to our department or to the district as somebody saying, hey, we want to sell property, I can almost guarantee that nobody's just sat on that and not brought it to others to make decisions. So we need to have a process in place that when properties come available, there needs to be a funding source to be able to purchase properties if they meet the right criteria, if they're in an identified, needed area, if it's something that's valuable that we could develop. But none of that's in place right now.
Okay. thank you for Mike, and I apologize. The fact that you and I talked about it didn't make it available to everybody else. And it's in the report that we did in fact have an asset development program. And I just want to, nobody's fault, but I want us to keep looking at, if we don't identify things we need to fill, and that other than a small group of people know about it, it's part of, that's what our job. We are all representatives of the residents. And our job is to make recommendations to the board of directors as to priorities, system recommendations, etc. But without information, we can't. And so I just wanted to bring that up, that I look forward to that time we will have a visible structure to deal with the many things that are beyond what we currently have staffing for and systems in place. But when it lists it as being that there is a program that does all these things, it bypasses identifying that that's in the works. Yes, Ryan.
Yeah, so let's have a little perspective for a second.
Okay.
I'm hearing a lot of things that we're just not doing, but the reality is the purchasing, the acquisition process takes an inordinate amount of time and energy from staff. It takes a lot of planning, and a lot of times those things slip because agencies are not nimble enough and quick enough a lot of times to acquire properties. It also takes money. It also takes coordination. It also takes going to boards. It takes going to commissions. And if there's political issues with those boards and commissions, it makes it more complicated. Everything that we are listening to is more complex than just we don't do it or we do. So I just want us to, like, our rhetoric as a group really needs to be really thoughtful in how we approach things. And that means that if I've had a conversation with Mike and, but the rest of the group hasn't, then I make sure I let them know so that we know that everybody's talking about this. It's about kindness. It's about getting things done. And also this is really detailed stuff. And all of us can't do all the details because we're not staff, and it takes a lot of staff. So I just want to put that perspective, because I do hear a lot of times that we're not doing anything, we're not doing anything, we're not doing anything. That's what it sounds like to me. But the reality is there's a lot of things to get to do those steps. And sometimes we'll miss out. My agency, all the agencies I worked for, probably about 80 to 90% of the land acquisition we tried to do, we lost. Because we just don't have we're not nimble. We're not a private company. We're not a private party. So let's try to add that perspective in when we have conversations.
Great.
Thank you.
I want to point out that the whole reason we have NCPRD is it was outlined in the Clackamas County Comprehensive Plan in the 1980s. And it specifically spelled out then that we were in dire trouble, and that if we didn't get things done by 2010, and it's what it still says in the comprehensive plan. And then here we sit in 2020, et cetera, on the 30-year anniversary. So I appreciate all those things, but I also know that we used to have a much more robust system. And unfortunately, we lost the resident participation. And so,
and the great thing is, we get to figure out all the stuff that we did wrong in the past, and we get to do better in the future. So let's focus on that future. Let's focus on getting there.
Yeah, I don't like the term
stuff has happened, and now let's like figure it out.
Right, Ryan, I appreciate it. I don't know about wrong. Wrong is not the issue. Are we getting done what we say we're going to get done? That's what I want to talk about. Right or wrong is a value judgment. So I don't want to have that conversation, but I don't want to have what I'm saying being objectable, talk about things are wrong. Nope. We either have them or we don't. We're either going to get them or we aren't. And we either have a plan and a timeline to get there or we don't, or we're going to have a timeline and a plan that we're going to get there. Those are all not right or wrong. Those are putting things in place to solve the problem, to meet our objectives, why we're here. So that's all. Thank you for your comment.
Thank you for your rebuttal.
You're very welcome. I don't know if it was a rebuttal, but I wanted to make sure I was not misunderstood. So here we go. Next item. Any more on district monthly report? Good. So our future dates. The agenda submission is by June 13th. The next agenda meeting is on June 20th, and I assume we'll be back to doing that on Zoom as planned. Yes. Nod from Joel, nod from Mike.
As far as I'm aware.
Okay, good. Well, we specifically didn't do it this month, and so. And then we have the DAC meeting will be on July 13th. And at that time, we will plan the agenda topics and we'll be holding our elections and we'll be welcoming new members at that time. So that brings me to, is there any further business? Okay, then hearing none, this meeting is adjourned and the time is 7:30. Bye, y'all.